Hello everybody, welcome back to another great edition of Ed Puzzle Lecture Notes. Today we're going to go over the cerebellum, which sometimes they call it the little brain. We're also going to go over the basal ganglia and the limbic system. Now, like always, I'm going to emphasize what I think you need to know as far as this class goes. Feel free to write anything down you want, because if you're going into the medical field, you will have to know all this stuff. But I will only emphasize what you're going to need to know for this class. Also, the main thing you're going to need to know is be able to identify them by sight, from a diagram or a picture, or even like from an actual brain in dissection, and know their general functions. So first we're going to do the cerebellum, which is right here in green. So on this slide, what's most important? Obviously the location. It's located posterior to the medulla and the pons. So here's the pons, there's the medulla, so it's posterior, it's behind, and inferior to the occipital lobes of the cerebrum. So here's the occipital lobes of the cerebrum, so inferior means it's below it. Now, just like the cerebrum, there are two hemispheres. So you have a hemisphere over here and another hemisphere over here. This is a superior view looking from the top. There's also a central area called the vermis. Well, you need to know that. I highly doubt it, but the central area, the vermis, is right there. Also, there's called what's cerebellar peduncles, which are basically just axons or tracts which attach the cerebellum to the brain stem. And the folds in the cerebellum are called folia. Once again, you're not going to need to know this in this class, that is. You need to be able to locate it and describe what its general functions are. And here's the cerebellum in section. This, of course, would be a sagittal plane of section. So it's kind of cutting, you're looking into the cerebellum. It's cutting it into its lateral and medial parts, so you can look on the inside. Hopefully we know what lateral and medial means and what sagittal means by now. But right here it says the transverse fissure is between the cerebellum and the cerebrum. It's not really pictured here, but if the cerebrum was like this, and then it curves in like that, this right here, well, you need to know this, no, but this would be the transverse fissure. Remember that a fissure is a deep groove within the brain, so that would be the transverse fissure. You'd have to see a different diagram to actually see that, but I kind of drew it in there. The cerebellar cortex, which is the folia. These are these folds right here. Anytime you hear cortex, that always means the outer layer of the brain. That's going to be gray matter. Remember, in the spinal cord, the gray matter was located deep or in the middle of the spinal cord. In the brain, it's located superficial or on the outside of the brain. So the reason why this is gray matter is because this is where the central nuclei are located. So remember, what makes it white is the myelinated axons, and what makes this out here gray is because this is mostly cell bodies, and that's what makes it nuclei. Remember? Clusters of cell bodies located within the central nervous system are called nuclei. Now, this is in red, so I guess we might need to know this. What's called the arbor vitae, which I believe it's Latin, stands for tree of life. And all that is the white matter that's deep within the cerebellum. So if you look in here, if you look at this, it kind of branches off. This white matter, these myelinated axons, they branch off and look kind of like a tree. And that's what's called the arbor vitae. Will you need to know that? Yes. That's why I put it in red. Alright, so now that we know where the cerebellum is, right here, just posterior to the brain stem and inferior to the occipital lobe of the cerebrum, its function is something called proprioception. And basically that is just it coordinates skeletal muscle contractions. It coordinates skeletal muscle movements. And these are skilled motor activities. So these are things that are pretty complicated movements, like you athletes, those are pretty complicated movements, whether you're in track, football, whatever, or if you're a dancer. So it receives input from the primary motor cortex, which initiates the movement, but it's the cerebellum which smooths all those movements out. It actually allows you to know, where am I in space? So you've probably seen divers that are doing all these flips, and before they dive into the water, how do they know where they are in space? Where it's the cerebellum that can really tell where they are in space and actually coordinate all those sophisticated movements to smooth them out. That is the basic function of the cerebellum. And I think right now would be a good time for a brain break. So let's see if you can do this. Rearrange the letters O, O, U, S, W, T, D, N, E, J, R to spell just one word. Let's see if you can figure that out. See if you can figure out what all those letters is to see if you can spell just one word. And the answer, of course, is just one word. And moving on from the cerebellum, which helps coordinate athletic or complex muscle movements. Now you have the basal ganglia. The basal ganglia, which also have to do with movements. Now I don't like initiate movement. Now you can write it if you want. I personally don't like it, because what initiates movement is, if this is the central sulcus, remember the sulcus is a shallow groove in the brain. This right here would be the primary motor cortex. And that is what initiates muscle movements. And it sends that to the basal ganglia. Now, the basal ganglia, for the most part, terminate movements. So they can get input from the primary motor cortex, and it's the basal ganglia which kind of decides whether to continue on with that movement or to cancel it. But you do need to know that it is involved in the movements of skeletal muscles. And I would definitely draw this figure, because even though I'm not a huge fan of that diagram, because it's lacking some of the, like where's the putamen? It's not in there. It's lacking some of the structures in the basal ganglia. Definitely know what that looks like, because it's going to look very familiar to it's going to look very similar to what's coming next, which is the limbic system. So be able to differentiate between the basal ganglia and the limbic system. And now here we have the limbic system. Now if you notice, they look pretty similar, so one thing you're going to have to be able to do is tell the difference between the limbic system and the basal ganglia. And if you notice, when you look back, and feel free to go ahead and look back, in the basal ganglia, which was also in green, it was much thicker. The caudate nucleus was much thicker than the fornix or the hippocampus. It was much thicker. So this is much thinner. And that's basically how I tell the difference between the limbic system and the basal ganglia. So here you have, very important, the amygdala right here. And just posterior to that, you have the hippocampus. Those are going to be the two main ones we're going to be concerned about here on this one. So now that hopefully you can identify it and recognize it, now what's its function? And I don't know why it's in purple, but it is basically what's called your emotional brain. Emotional brain. So pleasure, anger, pain, and especially fear. It also plays a major role in storing new memories. So when you guys did your case studies about people with brain lesions or brain damage, you knew if you have damage to your hippocampus, you have a lesion on your hippocampus, Even though you can remember old memories, you're unable to store new memories. And the amygdala is very important in storing memories that are very highly emotional. And you'll need to know this. Strong emotions increase the efficiency of memory. And that's probably pretty obvious. It's kind of like if you're brushing your teeth, you probably won't remember that because you do it every day. But if one day you're brushing your teeth and you accidentally stab through your lip and it's bleeding, you'll probably remember that more because of the pain involved. And that's because the amygdala helped to store that memory, and it's going to be a much easier memory to retrieve. And our quizzy brain number 2. So of course I'm going to ask you some questions, and let's see if you get them right. And I guess this would be quizzy number 3, because what is this picture representing? What is this a diagram of? Let's see if you get it right. And now going a little deeper into the amygdala. Here it is right here in the limbic system, just anterior or in front of the hippocampus. So this is anterior, or the front. This is posterior. This is the back. Of course, the cerebellum will be located right there. Right here, of course, would be the transverse fissure between the cerebrum and the cerebellum. So, of course, we already said it's part of the limbic system. There are two of the amygdala. So there's one here, which is on the left side, and there'll also be another one over there on the other side, the right side of the brain. And, of course, its function: fear, anxiety, anger, center of the brain. And here it also says that research suggests it also makes you more aware of your surroundings and helps you avoid things that are dangerous. So it's kind of like the real primitive part of your brain that's kind of like your instincts, like, whoa, something is wrong here. That's basically what the amygdala does, something that helps you respond in the event of danger. And last thing we have is the hippocampus. So here it is right there, part of the limbic system. Be able to recognize that, yes, that is the limbic system and not the basal ganglia. So there it is. Now what does it do? The main thing you're going to need to know: long-term memory storage. So if you have damage to your hippocampus, although you can remember old memories, you will not be able to store new memories. It's also involved in spatial recognition. Why did it turn pink? So that just means as you're sitting in the classroom, you can probably close your eyes and remember where the door's at. You can remember where my desk is at. So that's spatial recognition or spatial memory. Still don't know why that's pink. It's also a likely candidate for influencing Alzheimer's disease. Now, since it's just a likely candidate and it's not for sure, that won't be on your test. And also some other forms of mental illness. And I've never heard of this before, but I guess it shrinks during depression. So that would be a good question to ask Google. All right, thank you very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll talk to you next time. And it is review time. So here we go.